whether that is journalism in newspapers, radio, or TV. I mean, it's always like telling a past experience to try to provoke a future experience of art. I feel like our journalists have these specific, skills in trying to communicate about something that is not there. That could be extremely useful for this new trend of institutions trying to cover the emptiness and the void left by the closure of institutions because of social distancing. While we all hope that social distancing is going to last for a certain period of time, we also know at this point that this is something that, it's going to be progressive and that might come back in waves. So I think it's going to be very important for all of us to learn from this experience to try to see how the world might change for good because of this crisis. We're going to have speaking Sandra Antelo-Suarez, who is from the ambassador for Ibero-America, Spain and Portugal of Artforum. We're also going to have Dorothée Dupuis from Terremoto, based in Mexico. We're going to have Hrag, Vartanian, the editor-chief and co-founder of Hyperallergic. Alejandra, Villasmil, the founder and director of Artishock. And then I'm going to be moderating. So I want to start what we're going to do. The structure of this panel is going to be short presentations by each panelist of approximately a few minutes so that we can keep presentations short, but discussion open and hopefully enriching. We're going to start by Dorothée. Dorothée, I don't know if you want to say something a little bit about what Terremoto is and how this situation is affecting you guys, and what do you think about all this?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting. Yes, so basically, Terremoto is an art magazine that I founded as a blog in 2013. Started as a blog during a moment, actually, where blogs like Country Art Daily or things like this, where it was a very popular format, and it was actually a way to bridge distance and to be able to experience exhibitions actually without traveling, right? Knowing that I'm French, I moved to Mexico City in 2012 with the intention of creating a magazine that could actually foster discussions at the scale of both continents, both North America and South America. Terremoto then evolved towards thematic magazine with 3 annual thematic issues. So here you can see a print copy of the magazine, our last issue, which was called No Money, No Problem. So it was basically already like prefiguring some of the questions that went that they're getting very actual right now, i.e. the precarity of artists and the precarity of many of the models that we are using to show art, like discuss art, etc. Terremoto has a very ambitious distribution model in print because we distribute like 5,000 copies in more than 250 places in the Americas for free. So it's been a challenge in the start. It was always kind of a bricolage with like correos de amigos, like friends bringing stuff, shipping when it was possible, thing blocked at customs, weird trades at art fairs, and these kind of things. And the online platform is actually generating a lot of traffic too, but because our content is entirely free, and we're financed basically through advertising, but also grants and philanthropy, and a range of other contracts we operate for people who want to work with us, more like an agency or something. So basically, from the start, Terremoto was envisioned as a dysfunctional company that could never leave actually from only commercial model. Like advertising was from the start just one part of our financing, which I guess opens a question about how also art criticism is financed and press in general. I do believe mixed models are the future in order to guarantee independence independence in a moment where we all know that also, for instance, galleries are just going to cut. They're already cutting all their expenses for ads. Museums the same. So the crisis has triggered a lot of questions, but I also pushed us toward to take specific decisions that we were kind of reluctant to take. For instance, we're not going to print our next issue, and we're thinking to rethink the format. Terremoto is going to be printed in the future. If it's going to be a reader, like an annual reader, like how we're going to develop print subscriptions. We're going to use this occasion to remodel a website that has been the same since 6 years, and the uses of like the platform, like the design of platforms is very different these days. So and also the way we finance ourselves, obviously, like print ads were a big part of our budget, but was already declining because, as you know, in Latin America we had a lot of political crises in the last year that destabilized a lot of countries there. So currencies crashed. So it was already not, I would say, a great marketing situation anyway. So let's say that basically we've been a magazine that basically grew on crisis, because the crisis in Latin America has been basically getting worse since I moved there in 2012. So it's not going to stop. So this is a bit where we are. One maybe last thing is that also, except for the blog, Terremoto, we specialize in rather longer form of art critic, longer form of essays and conversations that don't really rely on actuality. We're not at all actuality sensitive, as my colleagues from Hyperallergic, for instance, or Artforum can be. It was a deliberate choice at the beginning to produce larger pieces of thought, very close to cultural theory too. So this is an angle we consider even more relevant today than it was before, and this is our identity. So I think we're gonna try also to contribute to a south towards south to south, and even maybe south to north reflections that we also believe are missing in the art world.
That is fantastic. Thank you. If that is okay, I think, Hrag, you can continue. Again, for anybody who's tuning in a little bit after, we are having all our participants of the panel do short presentations about the media they're part of, but also about the current situation, and we are hoping to have an interesting Q&A afterwards. So great. Now we're going to be talking with Hrag. Hi, Hrag.
Hi. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, happy to be here. You know, Hyperallergic started, we are about 10 and a half years old at this point, and we started actually during the economic crisis in 2008. We officially launched in the fall of 2009. So crisis has been part of our DNA as well, very much so, because it was a time when a lot of people were really wondering what we could do with art writing and how we can have conversations about art. And Hyperallergic came from my own interest in the fact that the art world, or the art worlds, in plural, I think is probably more accurate, we're having a lot of issues in terms of really getting their message to the mainstream. And by which I mean advocating. And when I went to college in Toronto, in Canada. It was during the time we call the culture wars in the US, which is, you know, the period when there was a lot of animosity around arts funding and a lot of controversies that were sort of coming out of that. And when I was in college, one of the things that was incredibly frustrating was I felt like the art community, as it was full with a lot of really smart people, there wasn't really the sense of the sort of immediate advocacy that stretched beyond the sort of like the monthly model of having conversations and advocating for a lot of the community. So that made me very much aware that it was really important to join a much more communal conversation that was also outside of the art world. And then in my own personal story, I also realized that in the beginning of the aughts, post 9/11, there was a lot of, really, it was a confusing time. And the arts really, in my opinion, didn't really play a very, progressive role in the post 9/11 world. And for some of us that were very much part of the surveillance or were being surveyed post 9/11, it felt very frustrating for a community that would always talk about it being advocating for these very progressive causes and ideas and all these different issues. It felt very much like we were not actually at the forefront of any of those conversations. So during the economic crisis, it was very important for me to help create a publication that could be very much part of that daily conversation, where it was sort of often we would be the ones that started the conversations and not always reacting or responding to conversations, which very much felt like that was the case for so long. So, we were one of the first publications to seriously report on protests in a regular way, not in this kind of parachuting kind of way, which I feel like very much happens in the art world, where one article happens and everyone feels like, oh, they feel very proud and pat themselves on the back. But the reality is that any kind of advocacy and work, and particularly at times of crisis, it's really vital to have continuing conversations, the daily conversations, responding to the daily information and the ways that information is circulated. So Hyperallergic for me and through the years, we've sort of learned that has become very much a medium for people to do that kind of advocacy, but in an informed and thoughtful way. So we do different kinds of, things. At one point, we publish hundreds of pieces a month. So you could imagine that they kind of cover a full gambit of types of articles. And of course, we also do podcasts. We do different types of things because we feel like we have to respond to the media landscape and the way people are consuming information. And one of the reasons Hyperallergic was created was realizing that the way we were consuming information was very different. And also our own interests. Like I found myself gravitating away from any print in the art world, with the exception of some of the books. And I found my own interests being very much online. And a lot of the things I was discussing was also very much online, and the conversations were evolving that way. So it was created in order to respond to that reality, and also to be very digital native, as we say, because it was not an afterthought, like this was just one other medium or channel to push out the information, but it was an integral part of that, which meant also thinking about how we're using images, how we're using links, how this information is actually being used by viewers. But it also meant changing the types of conversations we were having, which also, I think, responds to the way artists and others are changing. So, for instance, sometimes random things show up on Hyperallergic, and we often say it's because artists and curators and others don't just think about other artworks. They think about things in archives. They think about, the material culture. They think about fashion. They think about this. They think about that. And we try to sort of encapsulate all that. And it's also because the artwork itself has slowly sort of diffused to not only be an object in a gallery, which was probably in the mid 20th century was often very much sort of like lauded as this kind of ideal form, but it's because artworks themselves don't have beginnings and ends sometimes. They are very much about the social fabric. So the publication responds to that reality where the artworks and also the curatorial projects and the museums and all these things have slowly sort of diffused and sort of become part of the culture. I think it's a positive thing. Some people may consider it not so positive, but I think it's really important to understand that, the conditions for art and the material things are very much changed as well. So we often cover not just the art object in a gallery, but also the material and labor conditions that go into the making of that object. So crisis, unfortunately, is something we're like fish in water, because that's sort of been our reality. and the way we sort of have functioned in terms of understanding that all these issues are very much related. We have perhaps an interesting model. We are predominantly advertising based. Recently, we've also introduced membership, but we also have a little shop that sells sort of more gift-like items, as well as we have started getting foundation support. So we also have a multifaceted. I will tell you, one of the interesting things that people are often shocked is we were looking at the first 10 years of Hyperallergic, and I think roughly 1% of our support came from art galleries, believe it or not. So it tells you how, I think it also tells you how, unfortunately, marginal some art galleries have become to the conditions of art criticism. In terms of it's perhaps I've talked to some older colleagues that say art galleries were much more central sometimes. Now it's very possible to be an art writer and not function within that commercial system in the same way. And I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to have Sandra on. Sandra, can we turn on your screen? I don't know if you're hearing me. Hello, and we need to unmute her. Thank you, Sandra. So Sandra, I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit. Sandra, again, is the ambassador for Ibero America, Portugal for Artforum, and she was also the editor of Trans Magazine. She can tell us about both experiences, which are very informative of what's going on.
Thank you. Really, thank you, Aimé, for organizing this gathering. And thank you for all of us, for all of you joining us here. I would really speak mainly from my personal experience and the different situations that I have been able to respond to. And I think that criticism, that intellectual engagement, and the cultural production certainly is intertwined in the realities of that moment. I also want to thank America Society, a dear institution in which I curated an exhibition that perhaps made me who I am. In 1993, I curated the first exhibition of artists of the Americas, and its title was Space of Time, Artists of the Americas, in conjunction with 1993 MoMA's Latin American exhibition. We did, as a political statement, I wanted to do the publication bilingual, and I fought for it, and we did it. We included outstanding essays, which actually you guys have in Hyperallergic, Johnny Yao back in 1993, Thomas McEvely, etc., etc. And at that point, art also was at a distance, but in a different way. Artists of the North and South were distanced contextually with the geographical divisions and categorizations. Breaking those notions of categorizations was an urgency for me. And those notions were built very much from systems of oppression, cultural and economical. Parallel to that exhibition, I did a symposium, which I apologize for its title. It's called Fugitive Anxiety, Nomadic Cultural Productions in the Americas. But in that panel, which it was painful, the postpartum, so many cultural misunderstandings were revealed. And it was what it led me to start trans. It showed me that the act of trafficking of artifacts in exhibitions and now what it happens in art fairs can be dangerous. And what we needed back and was really proper critical contextualization. So after the recuperation of that postpartum situation, that it was really, tomatoes were thrown to some panelists, and I followed some of them and I told them whatever, but it was great. Thank God to that, I started trans, and to contextualize really and to weave multiple views and histories of contemporary cultural production. a platform of writings and interventions from multiple perspectives. It was multilingual. And its editorial tool was the internet in a dial-up era. I think that the editorial process, it's completely opaque. I think that we're not transparent, and we could be more transparent. I think that we did not really do all of what I was wishing to do at that point. I was searching for more of a transparency to expose the negotiations, the editorial process, what articles are killed, what is negotiated. So we started with symposiums. We're talking about 1995, live symposiums with leading thinkers in the field, Ernesto Laclau, Judith Butler, moderated by Reinaldo Ladagas, actually a amazing symposium that it was called Notions of Equality. We did on ecology, globalism, etc., etc. And there was so much, the field was so empty, and actually the mainstream publications were not covering artists from the Americas per se. It was very much, even though they were being called international, it was very much Eurocentric. That was something that for us it was a platform of equality. Trans really departed from that platform of equality, multilingual, and treated also the book as an exhibition site. So we would invite artists to do projects within it. For example, Paul McCarthy did a chewing gum cover of, which I'll show you. Maybe you guys have seen some of them. I ate many of them. It's a hand-sealed screen drawing by Paul McCarthy. 5,000 copies were done. The story of the production of this was amazing. In Guadalajara, I found a production company that I had to explain that this was not pornography because they would be cutting off the penis all the time. So from in the phone, I'll be screaming, please do not cut off the penis. So we did that. Inside there is white pages, 16 pages of that each one of them look empty, but they have each one of them a different smell. It's a project by Olafur Eliasson. We have a project by Cabello. This is sort of our performance issue. And we had an amazing symposium here that it was called Laboratorium. I cannot open it because it's supposedly 6,000 copies, that issue. And it's one of the only ones I have. So that was back then. And September 11th came. I guess I'm the oldest one of you guys. And I was meeting deadlines with our Belgian printers, and the FedEx man comes over late and he says, man, it's really crazy out there. Then Lucas Jimian comes in and says, a plane crashed. So we turn on our alarm radio that we had, something very dingy. And we hear, and I said, I had grown up in revolutions with bazookas walking through my house, looking for my dad. And I said, this is terrorism. We need to order water because we can be poisoned with water. It's the easiest way to poison us. So we ordered 100 bottles of water and so forth. But what is for me, how do we as institutions and as community, yes, we did have our water. Yes, we were safe. We brought in cash and I walked out with my white flag because I said, don't kill me. And then we were on 17th Street. But how does an institution really adjust to these new realities? At that point, the borders were shut down. It was a rupture. And on September 15th, we were on a plane. I got on a plane as 4 other editors got on a plane to go to the Walker Art Center. It was Massimiliano Gioni from Flash Art, Amanda Sharp from Freeze, Artforum, and myself from Trans. We were debating what to do really in this state of affairs and how can we respond to this new world order. And we speculated different alternatives. Amanda came up with Freeze Art Fair, amazing move for her. And she was really seeing where it was. But I think at that point, we have to understand that we were going through an era that the art world, that the museums became real estate developers, that the art world really became a real estate developers, even before September 11th. At this point, I had proposed an exhibition. I was one of the finalists for the Berlin Biennial, and I had proposed to do exhibitions in people's homes. I was so against that museum stadium, the larger is better, kind of, erecting more cement buildings. So a few months later, actually, Trans started in December of 2001, started an exhibition space in Chelsea, inside a warehouse, and we gave solo artists, first solo artists in New York, to international artists like Henri Sala, Jan Fudan, Daniel Guzman, etc., until really the mercantilism of the art market started ruling. Granted, everything that Trans had done was non-profitable. People were upset of coming into Trans and saying, what do you mean I cannot buy this? Well, okay, so this was 2003. We were doing other projects. We had done an exhibition over the skies of Venice, sort of as a publication. We had done a rock opera puppet concert, etc. But I really... what I really believe is that the analysis, the criticism, the contextualization needs to be at least from my personal perspective, to be hybrid, to be fluid. Different manifestations in different circumstances. The mega blockbuster exhibitions, the bigger is better. I fear that it has taken us where it has taken us. We are where we are. And I think this moment, and we're going to talk about it. And I think that we're really complice of this art world that requires us to be every day in a different city, the overproduction of everything, the corporalization of the art world has depleted the edges and the urgency. Everything it's about regulations, checklists, budgets, hairs, and the artist foundations that they require, 9 business international tickets for their families to go to their openings, and which creates these budgets that are so strenuous, and the maintenance of these buildings that we partially support. Because museums need to charge to enter into these museums, and now they are losing $10 million in revenues. So thank God, hopefully there would be less of these blockbusters. From my perspective, I think that criticism has woven into it, and I actually I'm glad I right now being at Artforum, it's so linked to the art world, to that celebration of the art object that, as a Hyperallergic has a different audience, that it does not go as much to the artverse and to this whole thing. I think that criticism has suffered from it. But I think that finally, I see a sunshine for criticism and thinking in the horizon. However, at the moment, I see really such an anxiety of having a presence online that it truly saddens me and perplexes me. I wonder, why are we so afraid? Can we give a little bit more of space to less production, to smaller gestures, to the humbleness, to what we are? We're speaking from our homes. We're speaking from a vulnerable, intimate position. How can we really speak from it, which is where really criticism is, where it's really developed in a way. So I think that hopefully less noise, silence is so important. And I'm sorry that so many lives had to be lost in order to get us to this meditative moment, for the art world to downsize and hopefully to have less art fairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much. Our last speaker is going to be Alejandra Villasmil from Artishock, talking from Santiago, Chile. We are going to, after that, have a conversation, all of our panelists. Thank you very much. Hello, Alejandra. You hear us, Alejandra? Hector, can you help us unmute her? Hello, sorry. So we're having some technical issues. The internet is not a paradise. We all know that. 1 second, please. Hello, Alejandra. Are you there? ¿Nos oyes? So, I mean, I think what I'm going to do instead, why Alejandra can join us, is maybe ask a little bit, a few questions that I had, and we can start taking also questions from the audience, which you can send on Facebook or also by email on the website. You'll see the address. You can write to artgallery@as-coa.org, artgallery@as-coa.org, or our Facebook for questions. And I think there you can send some questions from, we can receive the questions from the audience. We're going to try to get Alejandra back as soon as we can. Our team is trying to reach her. But meanwhile, I did want to ask you from the experience, I don't know, maybe Hrag can start responding to this. From what you've been seeing, you know, considering your experience and what you've been seeing in the last few weeks, what do you think is working and what do you think is not working about the way in which institutions, which are in many cases new to this kind of like distant communication at distance of art and promoting art remotely, what do you think we are doing well? What do you think we're not doing well? What do you think could be done better? What do you think are creative examples?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the conversations that are happening, at least editorially for us, is it's really curious to see why some institutions have decided to open up now. And it's kind of amazing that so much of this content could easily have been put online for a very long time, and they've decided at this moment that is a priority. I think part of this comes down to the issues of class. I think the idea that, like, who are these people at home that can watch this? You know, who their regular clientele isn't coming in. And I think there's definitely a sense that they're trying to appeal to that kind of specific milieu that they very, very much feel is their audience. And to that, I am very cynical, because I do wonder if that is reaching, if that is actually reaching the audiences they think they're reaching, but also whether they're that, accessed. I mean, I certainly don't have hours of the day to spend browsing all these different online features. I don't think most people do, even, our critics and writers and editors. I mean, I think there's a sense of exhaustion around some of the content that is now being put online and not being produced. And the idea that something being put online is good in and of itself, which is kind of ridiculous, as opposed to thinking about the online environment as an environment and responding to that. And I think we definitely saw 10, 15 years ago, a lot of publications that were print-based, thinking of online world of just putting a print article online. And I think we're seeing a very similar thing happening now, where people are just thinking, okay, I'm going to take this IRL reality and put it online, and somehow it's so much better, or it's so much more accessible. And my cynical side also thinks that this is a result of certain foundational thinking, by which I mean, like, foundations love these kinds of like check marks, I call them, that everybody should do. You're like, how many, is it online? How many people attended? This, are you being accessible? Are you appearing to be accessible? Which I think is even more true than being accessible. I think it's the appearance. And we saw the same thing with museums when social media was first introduced. There was a lot of kind of acting like being accessible through social media, but foundationally, curatorially, other things, programming was not responding to that. It was very much almost like window dressing to the reality that the shop remained the same, but they just had a better poster out front or something. And so I think this is what I'm seeing that is a problem, in my opinion. Like, I would like there to be, like, if you're going to do online content, then perhaps you should shift that content to also engage with artists and curators and others who work online, rather than just thinking you're going to take a gallery-centric kind of view and then push that online. And I think that's something that I would like to see more sensitivity towards. Part of the issue is internet literacy in the arts communities is not as high as we'd like to think. In some ways, the art worlds are actually behind the curve. And we saw that at Hyperallergic in terms of even like online advertising. Up until 2014, 15, some arts institutions would come to us and it would be their first ever online ad buy in 2014. And I mean, that blows my mind. I mean, how is that even possible, right? But it was a reality, and it still happens, I mean, with some of the older institutions. So you kind of have to wonder about why that is.
Yes. Absolutely. And I mean, also, considering how much artists have turned towards the internet, there's a whole genre called internet art, right? I mean, and I feel and I include myself in this, that we have not been trying to catch, the new medias around that. The whole idea of the virtual tour also, I feel this is a trend that is affecting a lot of disciplines. I've been hearing also, for example, that in academia, professors, teachers that teach at college, they're trying to do their online classes the same way that they used to give class in person. And it's impossible to create the same energy that you can create in a classroom online just because you're doing it through Zoom, even though Zoom, or in this case, WebEx, have these fantastic technologies that allow us to do these kind of things. It's just not the same situation. And you are required new skills. But at least, hopefully this would be a very learning experience for all of us. How do you educate audiences is another question. I don't know if you have any comment on that, because you guys have been doing that for a long time, right?
Can you just repeat that question again? I'm sorry, I heard part of it.
Sure. My question to you is, how do you educate audiences? The same way that you have to educate institutions, because it's different. But I feel like there's a whole new world of audiences out there that are trying to catch up to the current situation.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. We've always thought from the beginning that we are building audiences for art, not just reporting on art. And I do think it is important to realize that relationship is important, and you are educating and informing. And I think it comes from my own background, growing up very working class, and understanding that museums and other art places were not something my own immediate family felt comfortable in. And so that education had to come from understanding that somebody had to work with me and say, hey, just so you know, this is not an inaccessible space to you. And allowing people to ask dumb questions sometimes, being all right with that, and just sort of saying, as long as you're open to it, I'm willing to thing. And I think this comes again back to this class sort of identifiers that often happen. So like even having a good enough internet connection to log on to this talk is an issue, particularly, in parts of this continent where like being able to get a secure connection and being able to stream video is not exactly an easy thing. So then the question is, why can we, what are we doing that is perhaps turning off some audiences that are hungry for what we do? And how can we make that even more accessible? But without sacrificing these sort of notions of quality and stuff, which I think are very loaded. So I prefer not to use those, but I think I'm just using them so that people kind of understand how that sort of circulates, and also understanding that we may have to change how we talk about certain types of art objects to respond to the online conversations and environment.
Yes, absolutely. And so, what Hrag just mentioned, I just want to, actually, for those of you that might have not noticed, we have a fourth speaker, Alejandra Villasmil, who is actually in Chile, and she's the director of Artishock. And she's actually having technical issues right now. So she's sending me her participation by audio message, and hopefully I'll be able to share it with you. But yes, there are certain things that I feel that in the centers, and this is something that those of us that migrated from different areas of the world understand also, or migrated from different classes, which many of us did also, that we take for granted. We take for granted the idea that people understand what a museum is. We then take for granted the idea that people understand what contemporary art is, which is like certainly not something to take for granted. We take for granted that people are going to have their intellectual resources, but also the technical resources to hear a talk like this or to participate in a talk like this. And that is not the case. But I think this is very rich. Dorothée, how did you feel about this? And do you have any other comments? From your experience in Mexico City, and also maybe from your experience coming from France.
First of all, to react to what Hrag was saying, basically what this crisis evidences is that people who were doing it right online before benefited from the crisis, and people who were doing it wrong online, they just keep doing it wrong. So basically, like the websites and the archives, which were already functional and loved by users, they experienced a tremendous raise in their traffic, and they can really take advantage of this momentary rise in their traffic. But I think people who are desperately, galleries who are desperately sending online viewing on the Artsy and fairs and stuff, I have no idea. I'm not a collector of that dimension. So I have no idea if they're all maniacally scrolling through their online view on Artsy and buying stuff, but I doubt it from the few conversations I can have. And actually, talking about online initiatives in Mexico City, there is a very interesting mobilization of the artistic community in order to actually find outlet for sales of artworks that wouldn't depend on the traditional art market, of which we are naturally pretty much cut for most artists, and which is going to be terribly damaged by the crisis, possibly to a point. Yes, maybe I have no idea, and probably it's going to be also terrible in New York. But we're already far from the art market. We'll probably be further. I also believe that this is a bit of a fake question because I do believe that one day we will go out. When we don't know exactly, but at some point we will go out, and then it won't be the moment to really. I mean, of course, it will be a moment to keep wondering about online IRL, URL, IRL relationships. But I think what's going to be more important is to imagine how we're going to show art, make art. Once within these new conditions. So I think everyone also taking this as a moment to do this, and I believe that people who didn't really have. I also feel some anxiety in some museums to possibly like just basically show their board, show their financiers that they're doing something, but it feels to me that one can totally tell what's absolutely last minute and improvised and basically like a band-aid on a broken leg, and the people who really had thought about that since a long time. So at Terremoto, what I feel is interesting also in terms of like pure art critic is that we were already very much focusing on the intersection between art and cultural theory. The topics we've been talking about, which which I believe a bit like Hrag was mentioning at the beginning, in my case and in the case of the whole team and also contributor to the Terremoto, we believe art is political art as it's made in Mexico and in the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean. It is definitely happening from a non-objectual perspective that mostly never have the market, that very often doesn't have the market as a first aim for existing. So we also basically, so the crisis basically reinforced our will to keep talking about what is art nowadays and which is the social function of art. What will be the social function of this after the crisis? What is the social function of this right now? How are we gonna invent as a community means to keep producing art and to reach audiences that can be our own community, but also other people in the realm of society. And we believe that actually art and especially maybe socially engaged practices, which is definitely like something pretty big and natural, without of course saying that every art made in Latin America is like this, but maybe at Terremoto we've been focusing on generating this conversation. Well, it's gonna change form. Like so basically what we want to also like we're launching tomorrow a sort of open call for text because we want to reach out new writers. We want to produce new points of view about what's going on with two axes. One which would be actually about the changing nature of art making, and one which is going to be more like a dystopic line of fictions. We would love authors and art critics to engage with the format of the science fiction anticipation form, because we believe that it's an open space for imagination and maybe a way to get out of confinement, getting out of a reality that doesn't seem to offer anything but gloom perspective. Yes. So I mean, I think just the crisis will strengthen that, right? It will, as usual, polarize things. So I would like to think that yes, that maybe people who were already starting to get it right, maybe people are gonna be, you were doing it right, and not wishing bad to anyone, but yes, I think it's gonna make a big clean up in many things, for the better, but for the worse too.
Do you mind if I jump in, just because I think something Dorothée said made me think of something specific. I think one of the things about this crisis that we're in, we're going to maybe realize or encounter is how how much physical space is not as an integral to our community as I think that some people may think or held on to. And it's not that physical space isn't important, but I think there was a very, lot of the conversations that I think we think go on in physical places can happen here, and sometimes even in a more fruitful way. And I think in the same way that I think it's part of a larger trend, like even a lot of young artists I see don't think they need permanent studios, and I think that's something that's also with galleries, when, even in the terms of the commercial, now when art fairs can accept galleries without physical locations anymore. And I think we're seeing that slow transition, and I think this crisis may accelerate that transition.
Can I jump in for a second? I know I started back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. These conversations, we had them back then exactly that, when AraWeb started a project with Vivian Selvo, Andrea Scott, and Benjamin Viol, that it was called AraWeb, that it was the first project to invite artists to do artist projects online, and to think of as an artwork that the medium would not take over the content, that it would be actually that you would go look at it beyond its medium. Recently, I have been working in a project actually since a year ago on virtual reality, which is, it's actually in the National Gallery of London has been thinking how to create an exhibition for the 21st century, which it doesn't need space. It just needs a high cloud, a big cloud, and that's all what it needs. It doesn't need a building. But when you talk to galleries about it, they go, but what can we sell? And I go, it's, and finally, actually, House on Weird, which was the one that said it to me, has launched a virtual reality. I spent actually last year. I'm not a fan of it, but it's this celebration of the art object, this kind of aura of the object, which in a way I think actually the fashion world was able to even sell all of this high couture that has killed retail stores. The art world still has not been able to translate one and the other, and still 30 years later we're still in the same debate as to how to translate it. I mean, when we look at all of these situations that it's just a carousel of images that galleries put sort of a PDF of their JPEGs to sell artworks. No, that's not really what it is. But, it shows us how traditional it's our medium, as much as we want to be contestors of boundaries and so forth. Really, the art object, it's so resilient that they don't want to, unless you guys know what. I mean, can you share a little bit of what projects are interesting that you're visiting in these past few weeks? Actually, I have refused to be in the internet as much as people want us to be. I want to be with books, I want to be with silence, and I want to enjoy I want to honor the lives by not being so much with so much noise around it.
So Sandra, actually one of my next question, which actually let me enlarge it and connect it with a question. We have a question arriving through the platform from Catherine Morris, actually, which is what do the panelists think museums can or should be doing right now? And hopefully, I mean, some of that you already responded, Hrag and Dorothée, but maybe we can twist that into a more specific question, which is, what kind of like new artistic or curatorial experiences do you think that can come up out of this? I mean, that go beyond what you all been criticizing about the idea of the online sale retail site.
If I could jump in, I would say that
Sure.
I would like to kill the idea that the art world is only the luxury commodity art world. I think there's still that propagates. I think a lot of the art that I find most interesting are not those high-priced objects. I think often those, even though they're the center of a certain type of commercial conversation, I think museums should go away from that obsession over this sort of object-based, conversation. I think one topic we've been covering quite a bit in the last few years was Decolonize This Place, as many people probably know about now. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that that group has always changed its identity in many ways. By which I mean it's evolved to deal with police violence. It's evolved to deal with the art system. It's evolved in different ways and slowly changes. And I think the fixation on the luxury art object is something that really has dominated some of the conversations, particularly in the aughts. And I think more and more that's going to become just what it is, a discussion about a certain class of luxury object rather than being a central part of the artistic conversation. And I would love museums to embrace that because they have the ability to do that. Because I think slowly they're morphing more and more into just pampering to a certain type of patron and donor.
I completely agree. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, I have one more question, which in a way talks about what you've been talking, but a little different. Mario Caro, through the live stream, is asking, however, in terms of engagement with museums, architecture is no longer a factor interacting online. I would like to start responding to that. I mean, so Mario, something interesting. We were actually about to launch at the American Society a program of conversations about architecture, which we are going to have in a digital format. I mean, we're going to do something completely different. There's 2 curators working on that. We're launching that next week. But it's going to take a different format of posts now. And ideally, we will have the conversations in the space when we are allowed to reopen. But something interesting about the case of architecture is that it's so dependent on space itself, right? So, I mean, the discussion around architecture is mainly a discussion around space. But at the same time, it's a discussion that goes, I mean, about, something else, something bigger. But I think, actually, he's following up. Let me update his live. He's saying, following up on Hrag's comment on class and institutional engagement, one thing to consider the role of architecture. He says, besides the erotic value of the object, architecture is a big factor in making works of art accessible. So a question could also be, how will architecture figure into this new dynamic or not? And Mario, I would love to see architecture. My personal response, and I'll let the panelists respond about this, but my personal response is that I think architecture is going to keep having a key role as it always has, and that it's going to be very, very challenging also to combine, I mean, like an architecture of the virtual space. Maybe, I don't know how that would work, but I think something like that is necessary. I mean, because it's not just about curating the content, but also how you make it accessible. And that's not just graphic design. That's not just organizing the space or organizing the way we see a website or we see a computer, but it's also about allowing for the flow of that space, which is something bigger. Anyway, sorry, please respond.
Actually, I was actually thinking about how different can be the institutional landscape in a city like New York, and I don't know, with many other parts of the world, like Mexico City has an impressive amount of museums, but if you think of smaller province towns, many of them, you know what I mean, like they don't have museums, or they're all tucked into like 4 other buildings which had other functions and stuff. In terms of space, something we were speculating about was that possibly we were going to see a comeback of like weird artist-run space, like trends, like possibly people inventing. There was like this amazing Project 13 in the 2010s in Mexico, which that one guy was doing in his room in Hermosillo, which is a super small town, and it became one of the best art galleries of Mexico in the 2010s. And he was totally virtual. It went totally virtual, and he was actually coming from this like super remote place. So basically, I think there are a lot of speculations about like the comeback of the local. I mean, New York's not gonna. I mean, New York is the center of the world, so basically, you don't really have this articulation between the local and the global because it's there already, and it's probably gonna keep being there for a little while before another like storm, Sandy, like flood you in a few years. But yes, I'm quite curious actually about how the kids are gonna place art in new places, in their flats, in the place they work, in the street, online, sending letters. I'm pretty sure, not being this old lady, I'm slowly starting to turn into. I'm quite curious to see actually like how ingenious maybe a younger generation that's more also digital savvy. And also broke because I mean millennials, like they've been hit hard by 2 crises in 2 decades interval, and so they have absolutely no money to take any planes anyhow or to leave their couch probably. So let's see how like all these new conditions, social distancing and everything is going to reformat our relationship to art production, art objects, where we talk about that. Like with Terremoto right now, we have a small exhibition space that's called La Postal, which is in Spanish, La Postal, it means postcard, and it was a wink at mail art, which was very prominent in the 70s when no one could really travel or anything, and we actually want to go back to a mail format. Basically, we're going to launch soon an open call for people to propose us exhibition in an envelope. So I think there are like all kind of different things. Basically, this situation showed us that actually, as Hrag said before, we don't need necessarily to hold each other in the arms to be connected, or to be crowded all on the same floor and the witness at an opening. Maybe there are other ways. And that possibly this is what art is, right? The art object is telling us so much about the very nature of the relationship we have with materiality.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is fantastic, because if there's something that is hard to imagine, it's not so much whether how our world is going to work, with the distancing from objects, but how is the art world going to work without the art openings? That is really like mind blowing, and that will change.
I have to say, I'm relieved somehow.
Yeah, that might be interesting to see. So,
can I mention something? Can I mention something about art openings? Only because it might be relevant to this moment, because Hong Kong has started to slowly open up now that some of the pandemic has passed. And art galleries, and this is something we saw in New York before the city sort of shut down, was that they are planning for art openings that traditionally have been 2 hours long. Now they're making them 7-8 hours long, so that galleries are not full. So people can come over the course of 7-8 hours, and that people can still not be in crowded rooms, which I think is an interesting response, and I think might feed that sort of interest for the intimacy that many of us are looking for.
Absolutely. Let me see if I have. Okay, so one more question. I have a question which they're making to Sandra, but I would love everybody to make a very short response about this, because I think it's a very interesting question. So Sandra talked in her statement about how to use this time to make credit in a more meditative way, and the possibilities of a more meditative writing during this crisis. Basically she's asking Sandra, but I would love a short response by all of us about that. How can we take the situation to try to improve the focus? Sandra, do you want to respond first? You're muted.
Sure. Thank you for the question. You know, art criticism or thinking or writing, it's a solitude moment. I mean, it's a very isolating moment. One spends hours and hours without talking to someone. So having these moments, actually, let's embrace them. Let's not create more disruption. This anxiety of panic attack of I'm gonna disappear. I need to flood every single Instagram. It's like people have almost incontinence of posting. It's like, no. I mean, I live in the West Village. I live in the block of this Stonewall Monument that from 11 o'clock at night to 4 in the morning, it's horrific, the noise. After my thoughtful neighbor during coronavirus stopped demolition of his new apartment that he bought with concrete floor and replacing his floor, we were able to enjoy silence. And there's nothing that I'm more thankful to, you know, moments into which we can have just moments of reflecting. I mean, yes, there are moments of talking. It is we're social beings, and yes, who is suffering the most are those that live by themselves, you know, and we need to be thoughtful of those people. And sometimes I tell you, I stopped looking at Instagram because it was posting all of these things that, you know, that I go superfluous things, and I don't want to be looking at any of those things. So I edit what I can see. I look at reading, I go and think, but I think that it's a special moment that we should actually embrace it. Where are we going? I have been talking to a lot of artists these days for a little project that I'm doing that I would, guys, tell you later on when it goes out. And I don't know, it's a suspense. I don't know what you guys say about it.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. And Hrag and Dorothée, I don't know if you want to say anything about this, and we're going to be wrapping up after this. I don't know if we should wrap up with the fantasy of meditation, or if we should wrap up with the acceptance.
As much as I love that idea, it's like, I don't know if I could necessarily do my job like that, you know? And I think that's one of the things about being online is it's a different environment. And I do think things like more collaborative, I do think it also introduces different types of collaborative practices, whether it's in writing or art making. So there's also that. And as much as I love, you know, alone time and sort of like being able to meditate on those types of things, I think it just is the types of conversations and the types of mediums respond to sort of like the realities we have to deal with sometimes.
And I also personally believe that in a weird way, the inside and the outside have been inverted. Maybe before, being at home, taking a little time, retiring from the world was a sort of meditation. I feel now that my home these days is crowded with occupation, noise, cough calls. And this is actually when I go out for my groceries that the cities of Roma are empty, and I actually enjoy, I don't take my phone not to touch the screen or anything. And this is actually when I enjoy a weird state of meditation because my home is actually full of like an activities that I didn't expect before. And these days I felt it was actually very hard for me to write. So I think, and I think it's been the same for a lot of people too. because actually the home has been not a place of retirement as it was before, but maybe a place of insane and like contain energy and frustration. So I think it's kind of funny, like the polarities are right, are kind of getting the other way around. And maybe I think I will maybe want to meditate, but later.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I am very much a multitasker myself. And I feel that this like crisis has definitely like limited my use of cell phone, which anybody that knows me would be shocked, but it is true. And I think we have to wrap up because we already went a little bit over the time. Unfortunately, Alejandra's couldn't join. There's some technical issues. But we are going to add her participation on video at the end. And we're going to show, like, add that to the website so that the audiences can hear a little bit more about Artishock. And I want to thank everybody who was part of the panel. Thank you very much on the work that you guys have been doing already and the work that you certainly will keep doing is super important. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Pleasure.
Bye.
We'll have a wine glass on our own.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not a digital one.